Tonight we wander into the misty stillness of a samurai dawn, just before the clang of armor, before swords are tied to sashes, before the world sharpens into duty. You stand barefoot on woven tatami mats. Outside, a crane stirs in the reeds, and the first tea of the day brews silently, its earthy scent curling like a poem before words take form. The candlelight flickers, casting long shadows, and a brush rests in your hand. Not a weapon, but something gentler. Paper unfurls before you, waiting. Here's the twist. You're a samurai, a warrior trained in mortal combat, ready to defend honor with terrifying precision. But right now, your biggest concern is whether that last syllable completes the 5-7-5 structure of a haiku about frogs. You probably won't survive this society, at least not without some emotional whiplash. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You begin your day not by unsheathing a sword, but by dipping a brush into ink. In a world where honor and appearance dictate your fate, the samurai's morning doesn't start with violence. It begins with reflection. Writing poetry, especially in the form of waka or haiku, was more than a gentle pastime. It was a core part of the Bushido ideal. You write because it centers you. You write because stillness is as sacred as swordsmanship. You write because your lord might ask for a verse before breakfast. In this pre-battle calm of the morning, the samurai observed nature. Crickets fading, the dew on grass, the faint outline of Mount Fuji on the horizon. To notice these details wasn't just aesthetic, it was philosophical training. In noticing, you train your senses. You train your presence. You prepare to make decisions as quickly as a falling petal. Your breakfast waits: simple rice, pickled plums, a little miso. But it doesn't rush you. The first duty of the day is not eating, nor polishing your blade. It is making sense of the world in 17 syllables or less. Not exactly what your modern Jimbro would expect of history's most feared warrior. And there's more to this than quirky tradition. The samurai worldview was steeped in Zen Buddhism. You don't chase glory. You dissolve the ego. You recognize impermanence. And what's more impermanent than a poem scribbled on rice paper before a duel? There's something deeply human about that. Something sleepy too. A typical morning haiku might go, "Frost on bamboo leaves." Even warriors pause to hear the sparrow's complaint. Not exactly a war cry, but that's the point. Strength was defined not by brute force, but by balance. You were supposed to be alert, but calm, deadly but kind, the kind of person who could tie your sash with one hand and paint cherry blossoms with the other. Imagine now you're in a dojo, not training in combat, but in verse. The sensei is pacing, not critiquing your form, but your metaphors. You recite a line about a koi fish. He grunts. You add a twist about wind in the reeds. He nods. You've done well. Tomorrow, you'll carry a spear. Today, you polish your heart. Historians still argue whether all samurai genuinely embraced this poetic life, or whether it was a trend pushed by elites. Like a 17th century version of journaling for mindfulness. But scrolls don't lie. The surviving verses show thousands of samurai participating, and some of their lines are as tender as anything written by cloistered monks. You would be forgiven for imagining the samurai as grim, bloodthirsty warriors in clanking armor, but real life rarely cooperates with cinematic tropes. These were people of complexity. They trained to kill, but lived to observe. They could execute a flawless kata, then spend an hour contemplating plum blossoms in silence. That a duality, that strange soft edge to their otherwise strict lifestyle, is exactly what draws you in. Now you lift your inkstone again. The candle has burned lower. You've written something about the sound of your own footsteps. It's not very good, but it doesn't matter. You feel clear, ready. Your stomach rumbles. Maybe now. Breakfast. Outside, the day has begun. Peasants are already carrying water buckets. The blacksmith's hammer echoes down the lane. You rise quietly, roll your scroll, and bow once to the morning light. You sit down cross-legged, your writing brush still sticky with ink, the thin rice paper drying in a gentle breeze. A samurai's day must begin with harmony, even if the rest of the day will be anything but. That's the paradox, isn't it? In a world where one insult could lead to death, where social codes are as brittle as they are unbending, the most dangerous men are expected to be the softest in spirit. The rice bowl steams in front of you now. A salted plum rests in its center like a jewel. Simple, minimal, perfect. The meal is not meant to delight. It is meant to discipline. Breakfast becomes another kind of ritual, like the poetry, like the sword practice. You chew slowly, mindfully, as if your jaw is participating in a moral code. The servants keep their eyes lowered. You don't speak unless necessary. That's not rudeness, it's poise. A man who needs to chatter through breakfast isn't a man ready to face a challenge. And if you lived in the Edo period, challenges were everywhere, even in the breakfast itself. There were rules about how to sit, how to hold your chopsticks, when to thank the kitchen. Violate them and you might lose face, or worse, reputation. You glance again at your poem. It's drying on the windowsill now. The black strokes bold and slightly uneven. It speaks of clouds hovering over a silent pond. Maybe a metaphor for your own mind. Maybe just a weather report. Either way, it serves its purpose. A daily reminder that clarity precedes control. The emphasis on poetry wasn't accidental. The Tokugawa shogunate, which ruled Japan for over 250 years, promoted this kind of introspective discipline. Peace came with its own demands. With no constant war to wage, samurai turned inward. Their battlefield became the self, so they refined their sword skills, sure, but they also took up calligraphy, the tea ceremony, no theatre, and yes, poetry. You couldn't just be fierce, you had to be refined. This dual cultivation of steel and spirit was known as Bumbu Ryodo, the way of both pen and sword. The idea was that true mastery required balance. You shouldn't be too soft, nor too hard, too poetic, and you become useless in battle. Too brutal, and you become little more than a beast. You are to be a storm in stillness, a koi fish with claws. And yes, it's true. Some samurai probably rolled their eyes at all this. Historians still argue whether all this high-mindedness was more propaganda than reality. After all, not every warrior was quoting Basho or debating metaphor structure. Many were just trying to stay alive, manage their lands, and not get caught yawning during a superior's haiku reading. But the expectation remained. Poetry was seen as a test of taste and self-control. It revealed how much you noticed about the world, how attuned you were to beauty, pain, the passing of seasons. To write nothing at all could be seen as a sign of insensitivity. And if you ever wanted to climb the ranks socially or catch the attention of a daimyo, you'd better have at least a few elegant verses tucked into your sleeve. So now, as your breakfast ends, You rise with care. Every motion is intentional, every pause part of a silent language. The way you tuck in your robes, the direction you bow to the garden, it's all choreography. Like poetry, like swordplay, it's about knowing when to stop. You walk toward the small garden outside your room. Raked gravel, moss on stones, a single maple tree with a few orange leaves left. You breathe deeply. There is no hurry. You will train soon, yes. Spar with wooden swords. Review the tactical scrolls. Tend to the accounts of your household. But not yet. First, you kneel once more, this time to trace a line in the sand with a slender bamboo rake. The line curves slightly, like the final flourish of a calligraphy stroke. That too is poetry. You pause to think of another verse. Just one line. Something about leaves. And in this moment, you are both warrior and monk. One foot in stillness, the other in fire. Now you tighten your sash, slide your feet into wooden gaiter sandals, and step into the courtyard where the training grounds begin. The gravel crunches beneath you, echoing faintly off wooden walls. A morning mist still clings to the earth, wrapping the dojo's roof in a sleepy haze. You stretch your arms slowly, feeling the crack of joints that bear yesterday's weight. Breakfast digests in silence. The poem is still folded in your sleeve. You aren't alone out here. Your peers gather one by one, forming an orderly line. No one speaks above a murmur. Even greetings are bowed, not spoken. Samurai, after all, are masters of understatement. Unless you're slicing something in half, drama is to be avoided at all costs. As you face the training dummy, made from bundled straw and cloth, worn thin by years of wooden blade strikes, you tighten your grip on your bokken. The sword is heavy in your hands this morning. Not physically, but symbolically. Today, like every day, you remind yourself, this wooden blade isn't a toy. It is a lesson. In control, in presence, in restraint. The strikes begin, measured, deliberate, rhythmic. Not frantic slashes, but careful arcs. Your breath matches your movements. In on the race, out on the strike. The kata, these choreographed sequences, are not about violence. They are about precision, flow, alignment. In a strange way, they're poetry too. Physical haiku. And here comes the first joke of the day. Not from your lips, of course, but from your aching shoulder. It whispers. Perhaps fewer cherry blossom metaphors next time, and more upper body conditioning. You ignore it. Barely. During the Edo period, samurai training evolved into something far more symbolic than practical. Japan was relatively peaceful under Tokugawa rule, and the need for constant combat had faded. But the identity of the samurai couldn't be allowed to rust, so the rituals intensified. Sword training became less about slaying enemies and more about refining self-discipline. It was a daily rehearsal of balance, posture, and presence. Swing, breathe, pause. Even your opponent, when sparring is allowed, is not really your enemy. He's a mirror, a reminder of how you react under pressure. A man who lunges wildly, eyes full of rage, not ready. A man who hesitates to move, not ready. A man who breathes evenly, meets you at the center, and waits. That's someone who's read a few poems this morning. Historians still argue whether the average samurai was truly as graceful as the idealized images suggest. Were they really meditative warriors in mourning robes, or just tax collectors with swords? It's likely many leaned more toward bureaucracy than battle. But the mythology endured, and myths shape behavior just as much as laws. You pause in your movements now. Wipe your brow. Feel the sweat cool on your skin. The training has served its purpose. It centers you, not in a vague New Age way, but with clarity. You know your weight. You feel where your feet connect with the earth. You sense how your breath is no longer shallow. That awareness might just save your life one day, even if the only thing attacking you is a sudden angry nobleman with too much sake in his veins. A curious note. In some elite circles, it was considered poor form to appear too skilled in martial arts. Yes, really. Displaying too much effort was undignified. Refinement meant showing no strain, moving as though you simply woke up with impeccable sword technique. That performative ease became a status symbol. After all, anyone can fight. But can you look bored while doing it? As you bow to the training dummy, a leaf falls nearby. You watch it flutter, its path erratic, landing just beside your sandal. A line forms in your mind. Another poem, maybe. Something about a leaf too lazy to land in a straight line. And then from the hallway, you hear a bell. One long ring. A summons. The Lord requests your presence. Not urgent, not aggressive, but you don't hesitate. Duty, after all, waits for no poetry. You return your bokken to its stand, brush off your robe, and head toward the sliding doors. As you pass through them, a servant quietly steps aside. You nod, just slightly. More gesture than greeting. The air indoors is cooler, the tatami mat soft beneath your feet. You don't know what the Lord wants. A message delivered, a report given, or perhaps something more peculiar, a request for a morning renga session where several poets trade verses back and forth like verbal fencing. That wouldn't be unheard of. Poetry isn't just for solitude. It's a social lubricant, a battlefield of a different kind. You move quietly down the corridor. Outside, the sound of bamboo clappers keeps time in the garden. Crows call somewhere in the distance. And still, tucked in your sleeve, is that first little poem. You wonder if it will be shared today, or kept secret, like most truths are. You kneel outside the Lord's chamber, folding your legs neatly beneath you as the servant slides the door open with the kind of grace that only comes from years of practice. The tatami creaks softly as you glide forward. Before you even raise your eyes, you bow deeply, your forehead hovering just above the mat. The air smells faintly of cedar and ink. He's seated behind a low lacquered table, robes more elaborate than yours, but not garish. He nods, not quite smiling, and gestures to the cushion across from him. You take your seat with the care of someone who knows. Even silence can be evaluated. In this room, your posture is a paragraph. Your stillness, a sentence. You've written today, he says. Not as a question, but as a statement. You nod. Haiku? Yes, my lord. Share it. You reach into your sleeve, hands steady, and produce the folded paper. He doesn't extend a hand. You unfold it yourself, voice, even as a windless pond, and recite, Rain on morning rice. The bamboo fence leans inward as if to listen. A long pause. You wonder whether he's digesting the imagery, or deciding whether it's terrible. Finally, a quiet which is either high praise or neutral dismissal. You've learned not to over-interpret. Would you like tea? He asks, as if poetry and tea belong to the same genus, which, in this culture, they often do. A tray's already arriving before you answer. Small porcelain cups clink gently on wood. A warm scent of roasted barley rises with the steam. Historians still argue whether daimyo truly read every poem presented to them, you think, sipping slowly. Or if they just nodded wisely and relied on their attendants' opinions. But this one? He reads them. You've seen him linger over stanzas with more reverence than he shows a sword. Conversation turns to affairs of the province. Bandit sightings near the northern trail, a dispute over rice land, a courier delayed by mud. You answer in measured tones. In samurai households, even small talk carries the weight of performance. You must appear informed but humble, serious but not stiff. A single misplaced metaphor could shift your standing faster than a missed bow. Then he sets down his cup. "You'll accompany me this afternoon," he says. "We're visiting a monastery in the hills." Your eyebrow lifts, barely. Monasteries aren't uncommon stops, but they usually suggest one of three things: diplomacy, quiet reflection, or someone's gotten very ill and is seeking spiritual insurance. You nod. "Of course." He stands. That means the conversation is over. You rise, bow again, and retreat through the same sliding door, which closes with a soft shh behind you. The echo lingers longer than his instructions. Out in the corridor again, the light has shifted. Morning is giving way to noon. Shadows lean left now, and your stomach grumbles faintly. You ignore it. There's time for dried fish and pickled plum. Later, you pass through the garden on your way to your quarters to prepare. Cherry blossoms are not yet in season, but a few stubborn petals hang on from an early bloom. One lands on your sleeve and clings like a hitchhiker. You consider writing about it. Maybe later. Maybe tonight. In your quarters, you don a travel cloak, plain but well made, and slide a real blade, not the wooden bokken, into your sash. This isn't a battle mission, but a samurai without his sword is like a painter without brushes. Or worse, a poet without metaphors. Which, let's be honest, is just a guy with opinions. You mount a horse alongside your lord just after midday. The sun hangs overhead like a shy lantern behind gorse. The road to the monastery winds through pine forests and past tea fields. You ride in silence, the rhythmic clop of hoofs providing a gentle soundtrack. It's oddly soothing, almost like a lullaby on repeat. And then, as the path curves uphill, a scent hits your nose. Earth, rain-soaked from yesterday, ferns uncurling. The hint of sandalwood incense drifting from the temple, still half a mile off. It's the kind of sensory cocktail that makes even your sternest instincts relax just a little. Your lord breaks the silence. Do you believe poetry brings discipline or escape? A trap? A genuine question? Hard to say, but you answer truthfully. Both, perhaps, you say. One leads into the other. He hums again. That same undecipherable sound. But you think he's pleased. Quirky side note. Some samurai carried notebooks filled with seasonal phrases and natural references to insert into poems on command. Literal cheat sheets. Because being caught poetically unprepared was almost as bad as forgetting your sword. One samurai even claimed to memorize over 500 phrases related to moonlight alone. That man probably didn't have many dinner invitations. You dismount as the monastery gates come into view. They're modest, paint flaking, wood faded, but the structure is proud. A bell hangs crooked from a post nearby. It hasn't rung yet today. Maybe it will soon. Inside, monks greet you with practiced bows. Robes whisper as they move. Your lord exchanges a few low words with the abbot, then turns to you. Stay here. Listen. Observe. Write if you must. Then he disappears down a hallway, robes trailing. You are left in a courtyard where koi circle lazily in a moss-ringed pond. Bamboo groans softly in the breeze. Somewhere, a monk is sweeping gravel into meticulous hypnotic spirals. And so you sit, watch, think, listen. And yes, write. You stay seated in the courtyard far longer than expected. The air around the monastery thickens with stillness. Not silence exactly, but a deliberate quiet that seeps into your muscles and mind. You find your breath sinking with the faint sweep of the monk's broom as he tends the gravel garden. The spirals widen, narrow, disappear again, only to re-emerge. It's like watching time itself scribble in soft circles. You shift your weight slightly, legs beginning to complain from the hours spent folded beneath you. The koi in the pond haven't moved much. You respect them for that. No rush, no purpose beyond existing and eating the occasional bug. Perhaps in your next life, you'll be a koi. You try the idea on like a haori jacket. Comfortable, but maybe a little wet. A soft chime rings from within the monastery. 3 clear, even tones. Not a bell used for prayer, but the sort used to signal transition. It means something is about to happen. Or maybe something has just ended. Still no sign of your lord. You pull out the small writing kit you always carry, tucked inside your sleeve. A folded strip of rice paper, a narrow ink brush, and a cork-sealed vial of ink. Like a magician preparing to saw someone in half. You go through the motions with reverence. This isn't battle, but it is ritual. And in samurai life, ritual is often more binding than the law. You write a few lines. Nothing polished, just thoughts rendered into syllables. Smoke curls from the roof. Does the monk pray for my lord, or merely the rain? You frown. It's not bad, but it's not good. You set it aside. One of the koi seems to judge you silently. The fat one, orange with a white streak like a lightning bolt. You look away. Rude fish. Historians still argue whether these moments of enforced stillness were embraced or merely endured by lower-ranking samurai. You think to yourself. Were they meditative or just boring? You lean toward the former. It's a rare gift, this space to observe without having to explain yourself. In a world where misinterpreted glances can cost you a posting, the ability to sit alone and be quietly unuseful feels almost luxurious. Your thoughts are interrupted by a rustle. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable. Your lord returns, his face unreadable as ever. His robe bears a faint dusting of incense smoke. He nods once. We're finished here. You rise smoothly, return your kit to your sleeve, and follow him down the stone path back toward your horses. The sky is dimming now, later than you thought. The monastery's tranquility had distorted your sense of time like a funhouse mirror. As you ride back down the hill, he speaks without turning. The abbot taught me my first waker when I was 7. A pause. You glance over. He doesn't seem to need a response, so you stay quiet. He said poetry teaches control, of the tongue, of the mind, of the blade. You hum lightly in agreement. There's wisdom in the triangle of those 3. Tongue, mind, blade. Control one, the others follow. You pass a family hauling rice bales uphill. 2 adults and a boy trailing behind, trying to help, but mostly succeeding in getting straw in his hair. The father bows low at your approach, and you nod in return. The boy gapes at your armor, eyes round and fascinated. You suppress a smirk. The poetry scribbling samurai is apparently still something of a marvel. Once back within the estate walls, your lord dismisses you with a flick of his fingers. No further orders. You return to your quarters, shrugging off your travel cloak and sitting heavily on the floor. Your knees crack, loudly. You try to pretend they didn't. Before you can fully unlace your boots, a soft knock at the door. Come, you say. It slides open and a servant enters, hands clasped. Your presence is requested at the poetry hall. You blink. The what now? It's not an unusual request per se, but unexpected tonight. You've just come from hours of stillness and saddle. Surely someone else is better prepared to be poetic at short notice. Still, you nod, stand, and retuck your clothing into proper order. Sword at your hip, brush in your sleeve, self-doubt securely locked in your chest cavity. The poetry hall is nestled near the central garden, its outer walls made of paper screens painted with waves and cranes. Inside, a circle of low cushions awaits, some already occupied by retainers, lesser lords, a scholar or two. Your arrival draws polite nods, but no conversation. A tray of sake makes a slow orbit around the room. You accept a cup and cradle it in both hands, letting the warmth soak into your fingers. Tonight's theme, you're told, is fog. Your mind scrambles. Fog? You haven't seen fog in weeks. Where was that koi pond poem when you needed it? Too late now. The first poet reads, then another. Their voices are soft, clipped, deferential. Most speak in the 5-7-5 pattern, but some try longer waka or tanka. Each one bows slightly after finishing, eyes not quite meeting the others. Your turn arrives far too quickly. You rise, bow, clear your throat, not too loudly, and recite, "Fog claims the lantern. Is the path still where I left it? Or is it gone?" A pause, a few murmurs of appreciation, one approving grunt. You sit, and you exhale. Quirky tidbit. Some samurai would practice reading their poems in different cadences to influence how the audience interpreted them. A slow recitation could turn melancholy into reverence. A clipped delivery might hide doubt behind confidence. It's performance, like all else. The evening continues. The sake flows. A poem about a foggy battlefield gets polite laughter. One about forgetting your sandals in mist earns a small round of claps. Your lord remains unreadable. Eventually, he rises to speak. He doesn't read a poem. He just says, "In fog, only fools rush," and leaves. You all bow, then laugh nervously, unsure if that was wisdom or criticism. Either way, you survived. The night air hits you as soon as you step out of the poetry hall, cool and sharp. A welcome change after the humid warmth of sake and candlelight. You pause beneath the paper lantern swaying overhead. The sky is unusually clear. No fog tonight, despite the poems. You smile faintly at the irony. Your feet, unhurried, begin the walk back to your quarters. You wonder again why your lord requested your presence at the poetry circle. He's not one to waste gestures. Maybe he liked your poem. Maybe he hated it. Maybe it was a test. It often is. As you reach your room and slide open the screen, the scent of cedar rushes out to greet you. A small brazier glows softly in the corner. You kick off your boots, stretch your aching shoulders, and collapse backward onto the tatami mat with a groan that sounds more bovine than human. This is where the other kind of poetry begins, the kind that doesn't get read aloud in polished voices, the kind written in the quiet haze before sleep, when your body buzzes and your mind floats loose. That's when you pick up the brush and write something strange, something half-remembered, maybe something not meant for anyone else. Pillow smells like smoke, or maybe regret. Hard to tell when dreams arrive. That one you don't even bother revising. The next morning, you rise before the sun, like always. You stretch in slow, stiff movements, your joints crackling like poorly lacquered wood. The estate is still cloaked in pre-dawn stillness. Only the kitchens and a few stable boys make noise at this hour. You make your way to the garden, where a stone bench waits, damp with dew. Your brush and ink are already in your sleeves. Old habits. It's cold, and the wind sneaks through your collar. But there's something special about writing when your breath fogs in front of you, like the poem is exhaling with you. Historians still argue whether poetry was truly encouraged among all ranks of samurai, or just the elite few. It's clear the higher castes had more time and resources to pursue it. But even lower retainers sometimes produced verses that found their way into anthologies. It may have been more common than we assume, just not always recorded. You draw the ink brush slowly, deliberately, letting the ritual wake you up. One stroke, then another. Each character shapes your thoughts as much as your thoughts shape it. Rooster still sleeping. Does it dream of being loud? Or long to be still? You chuckle at your own sleepiness showing through. Still, not bad. After writing, it's time for breakfast, though not before weapon drills. Just because you're poetic doesn't mean you're allowed to be soft. The morning sparring sessions are mandatory. Poetry doesn't parry a sword. You join your unit in the inner courtyard where the armorers have already laid out the wooden training weapons. Today, it's Balkan practice. Wooden swords that still leave bruises you'll feel for a week. The instructor, a man with all the charm of a weathered statue, barks out commands. You bow to your opponent, a young samurai barely into his 20s, with too much energy and not enough restraint. You fight, you parry, you pivot, block, roll, strike, thwack, thwack, thunk, oof. Someone's going to need a poultice. You breathe heavily through the rhythm, mind clear. Your world narrows to stance and swing. This too is a kind of poetry, movement instead of words, rhythm etched into muscle memory. You earn a split lip for your trouble, but manage a clean counterstrike that earns you a nod from the instructor. Not approval, exactly. More like temporary forgiveness for being slightly poetic. Once the drills are over, you clean up and head toward the dining quarters. Breakfast is simple. Miso soup, pickled vegetables, a ball of rice. It's served on lacquered trays with the precision of a tea ceremony. You eat slowly, chewing each bite while the room hums with the quiet energy of men who haven't spoken much yet. To a modern eye, it might all look austere, but you know better. This calm is deliberate, cultivated like bonsai, trimmed, pruned and shaped into form. A retainer across the room passes you a folded scrap of paper. You open it. A poem. Not his own, but a challenge. A one-liner about the sound of rice cracking in the pot. It's playful. He's poking fun at you for being too serious in the poetry circle. You grin and reply beneath the table with your own. Steam hisses like pride, soft on the surface until burning the tongue's edge. You pass it back, and the tiniest smirk forms on his lips. A win. Quirky tidbit. Some samurai were known to compose poetic insults during meals, a refined version of what we might call roasting today. These literary jabs could be devastatingly clever or hilariously petty. One record includes a poem mocking a rival's poor choice in sandal color. Back in the corridor, your lord is waiting. You fall into step behind him without a word. He's heading toward the stables, which likely means a short inspection ride. You glance at the sky, overcast. Probably no fog. Shame. You were beginning to feel inspired. As you mount your horse and follow him out through the gate, the stillness of the morning breaks gently behind you. Crows cry above the trees. The rice paddies glisten like scales. You keep a hand on the reins, the other near your blade, just in case. Because while poetry may start your day, it rarely ends it. Your horse's hooves squelch in the soft earth of the country road. It rained lightly last night, and the fields still gleam with a fine sheen of moisture. The air is thick with the scent of early rice growth. wet, green, and slightly sour. You breathe it in and settle into the rhythm of the ride. Your Lord, silent as usual, leads the way. He is not a man of idle talk, especially not during these inspection circuits. You keep a respectful distance and let your thoughts drift. A sparrow flutters past, startled by the crunch of hooves. Beyond the rice paddies, a low hill rises, dense with bamboo. Somewhere in that thicket is a stone shrine, barely used now. You remember once visiting it with your tutor, reciting a springtime poem beneath the slanted roof, while cicadas screamed from the trees. Even the silence bites back when bamboo leaves fall on old stone spirits. It hadn't been your best work, but your tutor smiled anyway. As you pass a small farmhouse, a group of children scurries to the edge of the road to bow. Your Lord nods back with minimal effort. You offer a smaller, warmer smile, because someone has to. One of the boys is trying to hide a wooden sword behind his back. His grip is all wrong. You want to stop and fix it, but you ride on. Historians still debate whether samurai saw these rural circuits as burdensome duty or refreshing escape. Some diaries hint at disdain for the mud and mosquitoes, while others express deep affection for the land and its people. In truth, it probably depended on the weather and the mood of your horse. You pause at a checkpoint. 2 guards wave you through after checking your Lord's seal. They don't bother inspecting your blade. There's a quiet confidence in the way you sit in the saddle. They know you're the real thing. Eventually, you arrive at a small outpost where the steward awaits. There are accounts to check, grain stores to inspect, and a dispute over boundary lines to resolve. It's the dullest part of the job, this paperwork diplomacy. But your Lord handles it with his usual stone-faced poise, and you stand behind him, a silent spectre in armor and ink stains. While they talk, you sketch something in your sleeve notebook. Bamboo fence leaning, caught between neighbor and wind. Even lines blur here. Poetry comes easiest when you're pretending to listen. As the sun creeps overhead, the steward brings out lunch. Rice balls, dried persimmons, and small cups of barley tea. You sit beneath a pine tree to eat. A cicada chirps once, then falls silent. The steward apologizes for the rough meal, and your Lord answers with an uncharacteristically dry joke about palace kitchens. Everyone laughs, everyone except you. You were too busy thinking of how to rhyme persimmon with submission. Later that afternoon, while your Lord continues his rounds, you wander briefly through the village. A weaver invites you into her narrow shop to escape a sudden drizzle. The loom clacks steadily in the back, her daughter winding threads with practiced fingers. She offers you a bit of cloth, rough but finely patterned. You thank her and hand her a sen coin. She smiles, nods, and gestures toward the drying threads strung across bamboo poles. Rain makes better color, she says softly. You nod and scribble a new verse. Threads strung like stories. Rain pulls the dye deeper still, until cloth remembers. She chuckles when you read it aloud. You samurai are strange, she says. I've heard worse, you reply. There's a gentle debate among scholars about how often samurai interacted casually with villagers, especially in the late Edo period, when the strictness of earlier centuries had begun to loosen. Diaries and travel accounts from that time often show a surprising degree of informal mingling, particularly in provincial areas where everyone needed everyone else just to keep things running. You return to your horse, now damp and slightly sullen. The ride back to the estate is slower, quieter. Your Lord doesn't speak the entire way. But just before passing through the gate, he glances over and says, "That poem about the rice steam, I liked it." You blink, then nod. "Thank you, my lord." That night, before bed, you polish your sword. The cloth moves in practiced arcs. You check the blade's edge, not just for sharpness, but for clarity. A good sword reflects your face cleanly. A great one lets you forget your face entirely. There's a story your grandfather told once, about a samurai who wrote a death poem so perfect, his enemy fell weeping and let him live. No record of it survives, of course. Convenient. You wonder, did he make it up? Maybe, but maybe not. Before you sleep, you write another. Steel hums in silence, not for war, but waking dreams. Edge cuts through the fog. Dawn again. The incense curls faintly in the corner of your chamber, tracing pale tendrils through the warming air. A servant has already left your writing kit by the low table. You pull aside the paper cover to find the inkstone, brush, and crisp rice paper waiting for you. The blank page somehow more intimidating than the sword you wore yesterday. You stretch, your joints softly protesting, like old floorboards, and glance out the window at the garden. A single camellia blossom has fallen during the night, its red petals bold against the gravel path. Inspiration, whether you like it or not. Fallen camellia, bright as spilled blood on stone paths. No one hears it land. You write it fast, almost sloppily, and then chuckle to yourself. A bit much for this early in the morning, isn't it? But the mood fits. There's a kind of poetry that only arrives in half sleep, before breakfast, but after dream logic has had its say. Some of your best verses happen here, in that strange twilight between hunger and clarity. Outside, a bell chimes from the kitchen quarters. Morning rice is being steamed. The scent wafts in, faint but steady, a quiet reminder that life continues no matter how philosophical you feel. The samurai class didn't always wake up with such softness. Earlier centuries demanded stricter routines, martial drills at sunrise, inspections, or even surprise raids depending on who you served. But by the Edo period, a curious thing had happened. Bureaucracy and beauty had crept in. You were still expected to die for your lord at a moment's notice, of course. But until then, why not enjoy a little verse? Historians still argue whether this shift toward literary refinement made the samurai weaker or simply more complete. The warlords of earlier eras might have laughed at a sword arm softened by metaphor, but then again, they often didn't live long enough to enjoy retirement. After dressing, layered robes tied neatly, sleeves tucked just so, you step out onto the veranda. The wooden planks are cool beneath your socks. A crow caws in the distance, far too assertive for this hour. You consider writing about it, but decide instead to just glare in its general direction. A young page appears, bowing low. "The calligraphy instructor has arrived, my lord." You sigh, not because you dislike the man. He's skilled, and his brushwork resembles falling snow, but because today was supposed to be sword forms in the pine grove, and now you're stuck indoors copying ancient Chinese verses while pretending not to fall asleep. Still, discipline is discipline. You follow the boy to the study, where the instructor waits in formal robes, already grinding ink with reverent precision. You sit, take up the brush, and begin copying the first line he offers. The river flows without hesitation. Half an hour in, your wrist aches. Your strokes start fatiguing. What was once a confident sweep becomes a nervous squiggle. The instructor raises an eyebrow. you meet his gaze with a blank expression, and then deliberately recite. A trembling line grows. Even ink fears judgment now. Brush, forgive my hands. He does not laugh, but he does not frown either, which for him is raucous approval. Some samurai were genuinely devoted to the arts, not just as ornament, but as philosophy. They saw calligraphy and poetry as expressions of their internal discipline. A sword might cleave an enemy in battle, but a brush could cleave illusion. To train both, then, was to sharpen both spirit and self. There's even a fringe theory, one you once heard during a tea ceremony, that a few swordsmen used poetry to disarm opponents before duels. Not literally, of course, but by reciting something deeply personal or beautiful. They disrupted the tension just long enough to strike with advantage. Whether this is true or just a romantic fabrication, no one can quite agree. You finish your scroll and bow deeply. The instructor returns the bow, then gestures at your final line with the faintest twitch of a smile. Progress. After the lesson, you head to the bathhouse, stripping off the layers and letting the steam envelop you like fog over a mountain lake. You sink into the hot water with a groan. Every knotted muscle releases its protest, melting into the calm. Another man might hum a tune. You mutter haiku under your breath instead. Steam drapes the shoulders. Skin forgets what steel has touched. Quiet wins again. A servant outside coughs politely. Breakfast is served, my lord. You towel off and dress quickly. At the dining hall, a modest tray awaits. Rice, pickled radish, and miso soup. Simple, nourishing, ceremonial in its own way. You eat slowly, thinking of nothing and everything. Across from you, another retainer sits, chewing with eyes half closed. After a long pause, he says, I dreamed of arrows last night. Raining sideways, you nod. Dreams often lie about direction. He squints at you. Is that another poem? You shrug. Only if you write it down. He shakes his head, muttering something about poets being dangerous. You agree, inwardly. Later, you slip away to the edge of the estate. A stone lantern guards the path, moss crawling up its legs like slow fire. You sit beneath it, pull your notebook from your sleeve, and write one last verse for the morning. Before breakfast breaks, 100 thoughts bloom, vanish. Only ink remains. You close the book, slip it back into your sleeve, and rise. The day will fill with tasks soon enough. Visits, reports, maybe a duel if someone's particularly upset. But for now, you've already drawn your blade in a different way. Poetry has done its work. You walk back through the inner garden, where the pond reflects a sleepy stretch of clouds. Somewhere behind a bamboo screen, a gardener hums off-key as he sweeps fallen petals into neat piles. A dragonfly sips low over the water, and for a moment, you think of writing something about fleeting thoughts and insect wings. But you let it pass. You've written enough for now. At the western wing of the estate, a group of younger samurai are already gathering for weapons practice. You see them bowing to their instructor, their wooden swords tucked under one arm, eyes serious, minds likely still half asleep. You remember being that age, full of restless energy, eager to prove yourself in everything, especially in things that made noise. Back then, poetry had seemed like an obligation, like drinking bitter medicine for the soul. It wasn't until your first real duel, when time slowed and your sword met another's with the softest click, that you understood why you'd been writing all those quiet verses. Because clarity, when you need it most, doesn't come from rage. It comes from stillness. And there's no better training for stillness than a brush in your hand at sunrise. This morning, instead of joining the sword practice, you're summoned to the inner hall. Your lord wants you to review a diplomatic letter being sent to another clan. Something about shared water rights, overlapping fishing zones, and how not to offend a family famous for starting feuds over lesser things. You bow before entering and take your place beside the scribe, who presents the parchment with a formal gesture. The language is correct, deferential, but lifeless. You scan it, then tap your finger gently on one sentence. This line: "The ripples of your honorable judgment have long steadied our shore." The scribe nods. "Too vague. Too soggy," you say. "Sounds like flattery, written by a drowning man." He hides a smile behind his sleeve. "Would you like to suggest a revision?" You take the brush, dip it into the ink, and rewrite the line as, "Your wisdom, like winter's calm river, reaches us undisturbed." There. Still poetic, still respectful, but sturdier. Less syrup, more stone. Many samurai took pride in their ability to write correspondence that was both elegant and tactical. In a society where open insults were rare, but grudges ran deep, mastering nuance was a survival skill. A misplaced metaphor could cause offense. A perfectly timed verse could save lives. There's an old story. Historians still debate whether it's true. About a samurai who ended a years-long blood feud with a single tanka poem written on a rice cracker. He supposedly mailed it to his enemy with a bottle of sake and a note that simply read, "If these words reach your heart, let's drink, not duel." Whether or not the cracker poem actually brokered peace or just made the other guy hungry, no one knows. But the story's been retold in dozens of plays and scrolls. Why? Because it speaks to the dream of the poet-warrior. That you can fight without drawing steel. That your pen, well brushed, can reshape the battlefield. You finish the letter, sign it with your clan seal, and return it to the courier. He bows low, then disappears through the corridor with soft footsteps and a face like stone. You wonder if he appreciates the poetry tucked between the diplomacy. Probably not. Couriers rarely get to pause and read. Always running, never reflecting. Like wind chasing echoes, the rest of your day hums on. A few estate disputes. 2 farmers arguing about who owns a mulberry tree, which is amusingly specific. And a short training session with your own students, who are more interested in impressing each other than absorbing your guidance. You correct their stances, deliver mild rebukes, and when one asks whether he can write a haiku about his sore wrist, you nod and tell him to make it rhyme. By late afternoon, the sun begins to tilt low, turning the walls golden and the garden shadows long. You retreat to your private quarters, where the breeze has finally picked up. The paper screens rattle gently. You sit on the floor, stretch your legs, and pull out your poetry notebook again. This time the words come slower. You're tired. Not in a dramatic, war-weary sense, just in that soft human way. The kind of tired that settles in after too many polite conversations and not enough silence. A fan rests folded. Even wind must be patient. Sleep waits behind tea. You pour yourself a cup of barley tea. The warmth grounding you. It tastes faintly nutty, a little bitter, like memories that haven't decided whether to comfort or annoy you. Later, when evening falls, you'll participate in a small moon viewing gathering, hosted by one of the elder advisors. There will be more poems, some sake, and a few awkward silences that everyone pretends not to notice. But for now, you have this moment of peace. Just you, the fading light, and the knowledge that you've already met the day's obligations. You think again of the younger samurai outside, still probably swinging their bokken with fierce determination. Maybe they don't yet understand why you write. Maybe they think you've grown soft. But you smile, because you know better. To write is not to surrender. To write is to sharpen the soul where swords cannot reach. You drift through the moon viewing party like mist present, but light, unbothered, nearly invisible. The gathering is small, as promised. Just a few elders in soft robes. A couple of younger warriors trying hard not to look bored. And 3 women from the main house who compose verses with the casual grace of someone plucking petals off chrysanthemums. The courtyard is lit by lanterns, their glow flickering like fireflies on old rice paper. The moon itself is huge tonight, round and yellow and smug about it. Everyone glances at it now and then, pretending not to be impressed. But you know better. It's hard not to be impressed by a moon that bright, especially when it turns the stones silver and makes even grumpy old men squint like poets. The host, a gentleman known mostly for his collection of antique fans and mildly scandalous limericks, asks you to recite something. You're halfway through chewing a pickled plum, but you bow, swallow politely, and clear your throat. "Let me offer a new tanka," you say. Even though it's not new, you wrote it yesterday while watching a beetle struggle up your sandals. One leaf slips away. Autumn bows without a sound. The rice knows its fate. Even warriors must bend when the wind forgets their names. There's a pause. Someone exhales softly. The host raises an eyebrow, clearly impressed, or at least pretending to be. A few nods follow. One of the women taps her fan once against her palm, the old school signal for not bad for a man. And just like that, the performance is done. No applause, of course. Only the sound of the wind teasing the edge of the veranda. These parties, strange as they are, serve a purpose. They're not just about poetry or social grace. They're practice for presence. Being here without forcing yourself into the center. Speaking without needing a sword. These moments train you in restraint, in elegance, in knowing when to stop speaking. Because in a world where status lives in the pauses between words, the quietest one in the room often holds the sharpest thoughts. There's a tale you once heard from a traveling monk. He claimed it came from a monastery far to the north, where the snow makes everyone patient. He said there was a samurai who trained for a decade not with steel, but with silence. He would sit by the waterfall every day, refusing to speak unless his words could match the strength of the water. One day, another warrior challenged him. They faced off in the clearing, and the silent one bowed and said only, "You're not worth the noise." His opponent left in shame. Historians still argue whether that ever happened, the monk said. But the locals built a statue for him anyway. You sip more tea and watch as the youngest guest, barely out of childhood, attempts a haiku about moonlight and frogs. It's not great. There's a metaphor in there about croaking regret that lands awkwardly. But no one laughs. The host gently tweaks a line, and the poem becomes something that makes everyone murmur politely. A success. You are reminded that part of being a samurai poet is nurturing the next line of dreamers. It's not enough to compose well. You're expected to elevate others, to notice when a verse wants to bloom, and help it do so with minimal bruising. Earlier today, a servant girl from the kitchen approached you shyly and handed you a folded note. It was a poem, clumsy, full of borrowed imagery, but earnest. You praised it, marked a few spots, and told her to keep writing. She beamed like you'd handed her a golden bell. Who knows? In 20 years, she might be the one hosting these parties, smiling behind her fan, casually outversing every man in the room. Eventually, the moon dips behind a tree, and the host announces that it's time to end. You bow, thank him for the hospitality, and walk back to your quarters under the fading lantern light. The estate is quiet now. Even the wind has settled down, curling around the bamboo like a sleepy cat. You slide open the paper screen, step inside, and breathe in the warm, faintly smoky air. Somewhere distant, a frog chirps once, then thinks better of it. You sit once more at your writing mat, brush ready. There's still ink in the stone and a few moments left in the night. You write a final tanka, not for sharing, just for yourself. The moon does not ask why we stayed up writing late. It simply drifts on. Tomorrow, the same questions. But tonight, only silence. You place the brush down gently and press your fingers against the page for a moment, as if anchoring the words there. Not that they need your help, they're already settling, finding their place in the calm. Outside, the moon peeks through again, smaller now, less smug, more understanding. And you realize this balance, this slow rhythm of art and duty, this is what makes the samurai truly dangerous. Not the sword, not the strength, but the stillness. Morning comes not with fanfare, but with the faint scent of charcoal and the hush of a broom across wooden planks. You're already awake when the first bird calls out, some overly ambitious sparrow who forgot what day it is. You lie there for a moment, watching a thread of light creep across the paper walls. Then you rise, because that's what you do, because mornings are not optional, especially for someone of your status. You stretch slowly, your shoulders crack, your knees protest, even poets age. As you wash your face with water drawn during the final hour of the night, you think about breakfast, not the food, though that's on its way, but the ritual, the moment where body and mind reunite, where the ink-stained fingers of the night meet the rice-stained lips of the morning. And yes, even now, before the rice is steamed and the miso stirred, you write. The page is there, the inkstone is there, the urge is there. You sit at the low table, brush in hand, and let the morning air guide the first line. Steam curls from the bowl, like dreams I forgot to write before waking up. Simple, modest, but it does the job. This is the quiet ritual most outsiders miss when they think of samurai. They imagine swordplay, duels, drama in lacquered armor. Not this, the softness of boiled silk against your wrist, the way you blow gently on the ink to keep it from smudging, the slow turn of your head as you look for inspiration in the corner of the ceiling. One of your peers, more sword than soul, once mocked the idea of morning poems. If you've just woken up, what could you possibly have to say? You just smile. Exactly. It's the emptiness that speaks, that clean slate feeling before the day barges in with orders and dust and opinions. The mind is still, barely disturbed by thought. That's when the best lines slip out, half-formed but perfect. The kitchen sends in breakfast. A lacquer tray appears at your door, carried by a boy no older than 12. He bows so deeply he almost drops the pickles. You thank him with a nod, and he scurries off, relieved. Rice, miso, grilled fish, pickled daikon. Nothing extravagant, but everything precisely placed. It's more than food, it's arrangement, it's geometry, it's the edible version of a poem. You eat slowly. With each bite, another image floats into your mind. A leaf floating down a stream, a cracked teacup on a windowsill, a single crow pretending to be ominous. These are the things that fuel your verses. Not war, not politics, just the everyday clutter of being alive. Historians still argue whether poetry was genuinely respected among all samurai or just tolerated, a polite hobby for the overeducated. But scrolls don't lie. From powerful warlords to minor provincial lords, their verses survive. Some are stunning, others are unintentionally hilarious, but they're there, in all their brush-stroked vulnerability. One daimyo, apparently, composed a death poem so long and complicated, he died before finishing it. The final line is just, ah. You think about him as you drink your tea. There's comfort in that kind of failure, isn't there? Knowing that even the great ones ran out of time before they ran out of metaphors. It makes you feel less alone, scribbling your tiny tanka before a day full of inspections and discipline reports. After breakfast, you go outside and sweep the porch. Not because you have to, there are servants for that, but because it settles the mind. Brushwork is brushwork, whether it's on wood or paper. The neighbor's dog barks. Someone drops a pail 2 courtyards over. You ignore it all. What you don't ignore is the slip of paper under the edge of your doorframe. Folded in half, creased from hurried handling. You pick it up, open it, and smile. Another poem, anonymous. Probably from one of the students. It reads, "A leaf touched my hand, but did not apologize. I wish it had, though. There's something raw and ridiculous about it, and that's why it's perfect." You chuckle softly and tuck it inside your sleeve. You'll respond later, maybe with a sarcastic ode to impolite foliage. But for now, you walk. Not far, just to the edge of the garden where the pond sits, cluttered with sleepy carp and half-interested turtles. The air smells of pine and wet stone. Your sandals scuff softly. This is when the ideas start to bloom. Mid-morning, with your stomach full, your sleeves loose, and no one demanding answers just yet. You sit on the low wooden bench near the pond, brush out again, and start another line. Fish blink at nothing. How lucky to live a life with so few concerns. Yes, that one will do nicely. You sit a while longer, watching as a frog jumps in, scattering the fish. There's peace in the predictable rhythms. Poetry isn't always about invention. Sometimes it's just about noticing the same thing everyone else sees and describing it better. Eventually, the day will pull you away. There are people to see, paperwork to scowl at, training schedules to approve. You're expected to be precise, calm, and slightly terrifying. It's exhausting. But before that begins, before your mouth has to say anything useful, you have written 5 poems and thought of 2 more. You have honored the morning, and that, oddly enough, is part of your training. Because a samurai who cannot explain the shape of the wind in verse may never truly master the blade. And the one who writes nothing risks becoming too sharp, too silent, too brittle. You tap the end of your brush against the bench. Time to start the rest of your day, but not before whispering one more line into the air. Another poem, soft as steam from breakfast's rice. Let the world begin. The day drags you forward like an ox to plough. Duties pile up. Paperwork with seals you can't decipher. Meetings with men who believe volume equals importance. And sparring matches with overambitious students who haven't yet figured out that swordsmanship begins with stillness. You manage it all, of course. You're a samurai. You wear your composure like your kimono, tight across the chest, relaxed at the sleeves. But internally, you're counting syllables. Between each appointment, your mind slips back to verse. The clack of sandals down a corridor becomes a metronome. The grumbling of an old retainer reminds you of a mountain storm. The ink-stained ledger on your desk whispers ideas. You jot one down on the edge of a supply list. 5 crows and no rain. They laugh like they know something, but refuse to share. It earns you a raised eyebrow from the clerk. You nod seriously, as if it's a code for troop movements. Throughout the castle complex, you're known as that one. The warrior who writes before he shouts. The one who might respond to a tactical suggestion with a metaphor about plum blossoms. You're not quite feared, not quite mocked. Something in between. Like a cat who sits on the war map and stares at you until you reconsider your entire strategy. But they listen, because you win. Not just in sparring matches or skirmishes, but in the slow wars of reputation, politics and influence. And poetry, oddly enough, is part of that arsenal. Historians still debate whether poetry was a genuine marker of status, or just a cultural performance. Something men did to seem refined while planning someone's downfall. Probably both. But in your case, it's real. Not just performance, but preservation. You write to survive the absurdity of your role. Today, for example, you're summoned to assess a junior officer's punishment for falling asleep on night watch. The man is barely 20. His hands shake. His excuse is thin. You should issue a formal reprimand. Maybe dock his rice allowance. Instead, you pause and say, "What poem did you dream before you were caught?" He blinks, thinks it's a trick. Then haltingly, he recites, "Lanterns in the fog, too tired to know which way the sun is rising." You sigh. Not terrible. You let him go with a warning and a scrap of advice about using fewer adverbs. Because here's the thing. Every warrior has fear. Every soldier has exhaustion. But only some can make something beautiful out of it. You return to your quarters. The garden has shifted since morning. Sunlight filters through the pines at a new angle. A bee is caught in a spider's web and, somewhat miraculously, manages to wriggle free. You watch this minor drama like it's a no play. Then you write, "Bee wins the morning." Spider sulks behind the leaf, rewriting his plan. The scrolls where you keep your poetry are modest, bamboo-backed, soft paper, bound by thread. You don't give them titles, just dates. Sometimes not even that. Some of your poems you tear up and toss in the koi pond, watching the words float past sleepy fish. Others you copy carefully, as if they might one day be read by someone who needs them. Not for insight or wisdom, but for reassurance that once, long ago, a man like you existed. Confused, poetic, underslept, and clinging to beauty like a lantern in fog. There's a cabinet in your room, locked, hidden behind a rice paper screen painted with cranes. In it are your unreadables, verses too private, too bitter, or too strange to share. Everyone has them, the poems you write when the world tilts, when love sours, when old injuries whisper. One of yours goes, "Armor still on floor." She said it smelled like regret. She wasn't wrong, though. That one hasn't seen light in a decade. You don't open the cabinet today, but you think about it. Just for a second. Later in the day, after a particularly numbing military audit, 2 hours of rice estimates and tax yield projections, you step outside and find your friend, well, the closest thing you allow to one, lounging beneath the plum tree, pretending not to be waiting for you. He hands you a folded scrap of paper. Doesn't say a word. You read, "Even plum blossoms fall eventually, you know." Try not to trip, though. You smirk. He's teasing you about your famously clumsy entrance at last month's poetry reading, where you tripped on your own hakama hem and blamed the moonlight. You respond in kind, murmuring, "At least I was there." Some prefer to stay home and pretend to be wise. He chuckles, offers you a pickled plum from his pocket, which is absolutely the worst place to store fruit, but you accept it anyway. The salt stings your tongue. The sun warms your sleeves. For a moment, you feel young, not in the running around, training until you drop way, but in the still way, the unguarded way. That's what poetry gives you. A return to softness, to stillness, to self. It doesn't last, of course. Someone shouts your name across the courtyard. Something about urgent news from the northern border. You sigh, hand the pickled pit to your friend, stand, brush off your robe. But even as you walk toward duty, your fingers itch for the brush again. And somewhere, in the back of your mind, you're already composing urgent news again. The world never tires of ruining the view. The letter from the northern border is predictably vague. Something about unusual movement and possible tension. The kind of language that usually means a minor lord is posturing again, rattling sabers to impress someone's cousin. You tuck it into your sleeve, where it can't distract you. You already know how this plays out. More scouting, more posturing, more sitting around on damp straw mats, pretending to be ready for war. But before that, you have a different appointment. Every few weeks, you're asked to attend a poetry circle held by a retired courtier named Nakano. His house is a slightly crumbling villa, nestled at the edge of the city. Less palace, more faded memory. Vines have taken over one side of the roof. A crane nests in the koi pond. The man himself is mostly deaf and frequently forgets his own verses, but insists on hosting these evenings with a kind of noble determination. You arrive early, as always. The others trail in slowly, merchants with literary pretensions, bored monks, one or two women disguised just well enough to be ignored. Everyone bows too deeply. The cushions are a little damp. Nakano waves his fan at you like a fly. Today's theme is, rain and armor. Or was it umbrellas in battle? No matter. You settle in, brush in hand, and try not to laugh as a former rice official launches into a convoluted allegory involving ducks and honor. When it's your turn, you offer, rain like drumbeats fall. Even a general feels his socks going damp. It earns a ripple of appreciative chuckles. Nakano slaps his fan against his palm and declares it sufficiently soggy. These circles are equal parts performance and penance. You come not to impress, but to remind yourself that words can still be playthings, not just weapons. That language can ripple instead of slice. A merchant beside you leans in and whispers, "Why don't you write under a false name? Publish even." You shrug. "And miss this?" He doesn't understand. Most don't. The idea that poetry might be enough in itself, that the writing, not the acclaim, is the goal, seems absurd to men who spend their lives chasing coin or reputation. But for you, it's clarity. Not identity, not immortality, just clarity. Still, the idea of publishing your poems is not new. Every now and then, someone presents a compilation. The warrior's haiku or Steel and Silence, the musings of the sword. You always decline. Your words belong to the present, to the moment they're written. A sparrow's shadow on the wall, the taste of cold tea, the particular ache in your shoulder after archery practice. Somewhere along the line, you began to think of them like breath, necessary, fleeting, and not meant to be held. Nakano begins a slow, meandering recitation of something about chrysanthemums. You drift. Your mind follows the rhythm of his pauses. The hush of the garden just beyond the paper screens. The creak of someone shifting on an old tatami mat. And then you're back. He's done. The room nods. And tea is being poured with the gravity of a court ceremony. Later, on your way home through narrow streets lit by lanterns, you pass a drunk man singing about peaches and revenge. You can't tell if he's mad or simply very committed to metaphor. Either way, you jot down, peaches and revenge, both best savoured when waiting longer than you should. You fold it into your sleeve. At home, you find your sword waiting. It's been polished. The servant left a note. There was a fingerprint. Figured you'd want it clean. You nod to no one in particular. Then you pour yourself a cup of barley tea and sit by the window. Outside, the moon hangs low, obscene in its indifference. You think of the many times you've sat like this, after duels, after losses, after weddings, after storms, always with a cup, always with something to say but no one to hear it. So, you whisper it to the moon. Moon, you smug lantern. You never miss an ending, just hover and judge. It's not your best, but it's honest. Historians argue whether the samurai truly valued poetry or merely tolerated it as a required ornament. There are scrolls filled with war reports that contain hastily appended verses, often stiff and obligatory. And yet, nestled among them, you sometimes find real gems, lines that pulse with feeling, with loss, with exhaustion. Maybe that's the point. Not every poem is great, but every poem is true, in the moment of its making. You think of your morning routine, how it began this entire rhythm, the poetry before breakfast, the daily exhale of the soul before donning the day's expectations. You recall one of your earliest verses, scrawled as a young man. I bow to morning. It does not bow back, but still, I bow to morning. You were too earnest back then, too eager to be profound. Still, the heart of it remains. You finish your tea. Your joints creak a little more than they did last year. The candle flickers. Somewhere, a cat yowls. You smile, pick up your brush, and write one last line before bed. Night is not the end, just a longer pause between what we meant to say. The military summons arrived the next morning, delivered with excessive ceremony by a young page barely old enough to shave. He bows 4 times and stutters through the formal phrases clearly rehearsed. You nod, take the scroll, and break the seal with a thumbnail. A border conflict, not war, just friction. A garrison post needs an experienced hand. Your name is scribbled at the top, likely by someone who remembers your last calm handling of a potential crisis. You were hoping for another month at home, but part of being a samurai is accepting that peace is often the interlude, not the norm. Before you pack, you do what you always do. Pour tea and unroll the calligraphy paper. Today's verse comes faster than usual. Orders in red ink. Even the brush seems nervous when held with cold hands. Your hands aren't cold, not really, just restless. You fold the poem into your traveling robe. The road is muddy from recent rains, and the wheels of the supply cart stick. You ride ahead when you can, the hooves of your horse kicking up wet earth. There's a smell of plum blossoms tangled with wood smoke. A curious contrast that reminds you of funerals and spring festivals alike. As you travel, you see traces of old skirmishes, broken palisades, charred trees, abandoned helmets now doubling as bird nests. There's a rhythm to all this, a strange seasonal pattern of violence and quiet rebuilding. Your arrival at the garrison is met with the usual mix of relief and suspicion. The local commander bows too deeply. You suspect he's hoping you'll take the blame if anything goes wrong. Inside the barracks, soldiers straighten at your presence. You scan their faces. Young, sunburned, a little underfed. You make a mental note to adjust the rations. After the formal greetings, the reports come in. Most are as expected. Minor thefts, a merchant dispute, someone swearing they saw a tango in the woods. You listen patiently, nod, and assign scouts. That night, alone in your quarters, you sit by a lantern and consider writing home. But instead you reach for your brush and write, "Camp smells of damp socks. Valor rarely feels like pride when the rice is burned." There's a knock. A junior officer, more nervous than necessary, hands you a parcel. "From the capital?" he mumbles. Inside, a slim book, wrapped in silk, the poems of Lord Aritomo, recently compiled. He's dead now, but his words live on. You thumb through the pages. His final poem is printed with a note, written the day before his death. "I asked the sparrow if my legacy was loud. She flew without pause." You sit with that one for a while. Historians still debate the authenticity of these death poems. Some argue they were written posthumously by disciples eager to shape a narrative. Others say they were real, the final defiance of men who knew their words might last longer than their names. You wonder if yours will be read someday. Not your battlefield commands or official judgments, those will be archived maybe, but your poems, the ones scribbled in half light, the ones never meant for an audience. You consider publishing again, just a small volume, no name, let people wonder. The soldiers outside are laughing, someone is singing off-key. You lean back and let the noise filter in, a kind of lullaby. The next day, a minor border incident erupts. No bloodshed, just confusion over a stolen goat and an ambiguous treaty clause. You resolve it with tea and patience and write. Diplomacy is a goat, 4 scrolls, and 2 men pretending they care. You leave that one pinned to the notice board, unsigned. Days stretch. The tension deflates. The scouts report boredom. One soldier writes his own haiku about missing his mother's pickled radish. You compliment him. He beams. Poetry here becomes a shared joke, a morning ritual. Someone writes a verse about moldy rice, and another counters with one about the joys of properly folded socks. You let it happen, because even here, especially here, poetry isn't just softness, it's structure, it's sanity. And maybe that's what historians miss. When they write about samurai culture, they often focus on honor, warfare, stoicism. But under all that armor were human beings, craving meaning in silence. You dip your brush again. The ink runs slightly. Even in armor, you're just a man waiting for dawn to explain. Dawn does explain, or at least it tries. The final morning at the garrison is warm and full of birdsong. You wake to the sound of distant chanting from a farmer's field, some small ceremony for the spring planting. The soldiers are already packing, rolling bed mats and brushing dust off their armor with a kind of casual joy only possible when a posting has gone well. You're leaving behind a better place than you found, and that's something. Not glory, not legacy, just something. You saddle your horse with the same precision you've always used. A wrinkle in the strap means back pain later. Your brush and paper are tucked in their cloth pouch, always within reach. As you begin the ride back to the capital, you pass a group of children on the roadside. One holds a bamboo sword, The others jeer playfully. You catch a snippet. I'm the general. And smile despite yourself. They freeze when they see you. One boasts so fast he nearly topples over. You nod once, gravely, then ride on. The road winds through hills now, the cherry blossoms just beginning to drift like pale confetti across the path. You wonder if the tea house by the river is still open. They used to serve rice cakes dusted in gold leaf, not because they were rich, but because the owner liked to remind people of joy. Historians still argue whether the samurai era was one of unbroken discipline or fragmented contradictions. Were these warriors spiritual monks in armor or bureaucrats with swords? Did they truly live by the brush and blade, or did poetry serve more as public decorum than genuine introspection? But riding here, feeling the gentle sway of your horse and the scratch of the wind at your collar, you know the answer is simpler than that. People complicate things. Daily life, even for a warrior, it's full of pauses, empty mornings, quiet grief, half-remembered songs and bad soup. And in those quiet gaps, writing becomes a tether, a soft rope across the void. Back at the capital, life resumes its rhythm. The gatekeeper nods as you pass. The stable boy, older now, no longer runs to greet you, just lifts a hand. Your home feels smaller, but warmer. The paper doors creak familiarly. Your writing desk has a fresh inkstone waiting. Someone, probably your steward, placed a sprig of plum blossom in a vase nearby. You bow to it without thinking. You write, "Return to silence." Even the ink takes its time deciding to speak. Later that week, you're invited to a small poetry gathering. Not official, just a few retainers, a scholar, and a monk who brews surprisingly decent sake. You go. Everyone wears formal robes, but the tone is light. One man writes a haiku about his wife's snoring. The monk offers a sarcastic verse about enlightenment being just slightly better tea. You share your goat poem. It gets a laugh, then silence. Then someone says, "But it's accurate." The group nods. You walk home under a full moon, tipsy and unburdened. You're not sure how much longer you'll be needed as a samurai. Peace feels more possible now than it did 10 years ago. Maybe you'll retire to a small villa, raise silkworms, teach a little, write more. You're not sure yet. But in the meantime, you keep your mornings sacred. Before the sun fully rises, before the street sellers cry out, or the bureaucrats bang on your gate, you boil water for tea and lay out your brush. It's not always poetry. Sometimes you just list your dreams. Sometimes you sketch clouds. Once, you copied the entire recipe for daikon stew just to remember it exactly. But more often than not, a few lines arrive. Like this morning, the sparrow watches as I ruin another perfectly good scroll. And you smile, because that too is the point. Poetry is the only sword you never have to sheath, and some mornings, it's the only one worth drawing. Now let's slow everything down. The brush has been rinsed, the paper carefully folded. The sun has risen over tiled rooftops and vanished again behind the quiet horizon. And you, after this long, gentle journey, are still seated, barefoot on tatami mats, or perhaps just beneath your own cozy blanket, feeling a little more connected to a time when warriors still pause to write about flowers. Let your shoulders ease back. Let your breath soften. You might still hear the echo of a horse's hooves along a muddy trail, or the distant click of an inkstone being set in place. Maybe the faintest whisper of a haiku lingers somewhere just beyond the edge of thought. It's okay to leave it unfinished. Tonight you've walked slowly through a world that didn't always make sense, but still carved meaning into silence. A world where danger and beauty shared the same tatami floor, where strength wasn't always measured by how loud you spoke, but by how softly you could listen. So close your eyes. Let the last image be of morning mist over a bamboo grove, of a lone figure seated in half light, brush in hand, composing lines not for glory, not for legacy, but for peace. And with that, sleep well, dream gently, and I'll see you in the next story.